He built an empire from nothing, commanding boardrooms and crushing deals. Yet, for all his power, he had never touched a woman, not for lack of desire, but because his body rejected them. A rare allergy, doctors said. A curse, he thought. For 35 years, Nathaniel Cross lived behind glass walls, untouchable, untethered, until the day Grace Holloway stumbled into his office spilling coffee, scattering files, and breaking every rule he had lived by. Something extraordinary happened. His curse didn't react. For the first time in decades, he could feel warmth without pain. Who was this woman, and why did she make him feel human again? Could love truly exist for a man haunted by betrayal, whose past ex-fiancée had poisoned his life and left him broken? And if the shadows of that past returned, would he be able to protect the one person who had finally reached his heart? This is a story of fear and obsession, of power and vulnerability, and of a love that might just heal or destroy. If you're ready to experience a tale of passion, danger, and redemption, hit that like button, share with someone who loves stories, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Let's dive into the journey of Nate and Grace, where every touch could be salvation or doom. I was 35 years old, and the world looked at me as though I had everything. A glass tower in downtown Denver bore my name at the very top. Nathaniel Cross Nate. To the few who dared use it was the kind of name whispered in boardrooms and printed in magazines. Contracts bent to my will, competitors feared my ambition, and money flowed like a river that never ran dry. Yet, in the silence of my penthouse, I was nothing more than a man trapped in a cage of his own body. For as long as I could remember, I had carried what I called a curse. A simple touch from a woman, no matter how innocent, unleashed a storm in my skin. Welts rose like fire, my throat closed, fever raged until I could not breathe. Doctors, with their polished degrees and clinical voices, told me it was a rare autoimmune reaction. Therapists suggested trauma buried in the shadows of my youth, but none of them could cure it. None of them could make me normal. So I learned to live untouchable. In meetings, I kept my distance. At charity galas, I offered polite nods instead of handshakes. The gossip columns painted me as cold, aloof, unreachable an ice king who built empires but knew nothing of warmth. And perhaps they were right. Because what is a man without touch? What is love? If your body turns intimacy into agony. 35 years of solitude had hardened me into steel. I did not date. I did not dream of marriage or family. I buried myself in work, in the thrill of conquest, because that was safer than admitting what I longed for, but could never have. Still, the ache remained. Nights in the penthouse stretched long and silent, the city lights sprawling beneath my windows like stars I could never touch. I would pour a glass of bourbon, lean against the cold railing of the balcony, and wonder if this was all life had left to offer. A kingdom without a queen, power without tenderness, a man applauded by thousands, but known by none. The cruelest part was how ordinary it looked from the outside. No one knew the price I paid for every public handshake. No one saw the discreet medical kit my assistant, Edward Blake, carried everywhere we went. Inside it, antihistamines, epinephrine, sterile wipes. The armor of a man terrified of a simple brush of skin. Edward had been with me for nearly a decade. He was loyal, efficient, and the only person alive who had witnessed me collapse on the marble floor of a gala after a careless embrace from a well-meaning donor. I remembered the panic in his eyes as he injected the antidote, the way his hand trembled, though his voice stayed steady. Breathe. Nate, stay with me. You're going to be fine. But I wasn't fine. Not then. Not ever. The world saw a polished CEO, but inside I was still that broken man gasping for breath. I had stopped asking why long ago. Some curses, I decided, were simply written into your blood. And yet, there were nights when I let myself wonder, what would it be like to touch without pain, to hold a hand across a dinner table, or brush a lock of hair from someone's face without fearing collapse? What would it be like to wake in the morning with warmth beside me, instead of sterile silence. But dreams like that were dangerous. So I locked them away, buried beneath the steel and glass of Cross Development Incorporated. The city knew me as a conqueror, a builder of skylines. Inside, I was a man already ruined. I told myself it didn't matter. That love was for other people, ordinary people who could afford the luxury of closeness. For me, there would only ever be distance. Distance, and the cold shadow of a curse no one could name. Until the day she walked into my office? I didn't know it then. But that single step across the threshold would shatter everything I believed about my life. It would challenge the walls I had built and force me to face the possibility that maybe I wasn't beyond saving. But on that Monday morning, as the city of Denver pulsed with restless ambition outside my windows, I was still Nathaniel Cross, the untouchable king of glass and steel, and I believed I would always be alone. My office was my sanctuary, but it was also my prison. The tower that bore my name, Cross Development Incorporated, rose like a monument of ambition in the Denver skyline, floor after floor of steel and glass, reflecting the Rockies in the distance, as if daring nature itself to compete with man's creation. I had built it, brick by brick, deal by deal, until it stood as a fortress above the city. Inside, the atmosphere was hushed, reverent, like a cathedral. Assistants moved quickly but quietly. Phones rang in muted tones. Everywhere I went, people straightened their backs, lowered their voices, as if my presence was both an honor and a warning. Respect, fear, distance. They were all the same to me. I had trained them well, after all. No one dared touch me. No one questioned why I kept a space between myself and the rest of the world. The staff called me Mr. Cross even in private, never Nate. And so, the walls of glass around me grew higher each year, invisible but impenetrable. Edward Blake, my chief of staff, was the one exception. At 40, with silver creeping through his dark hair and a calm steadiness in his eyes, he had become more than an assistant. He was my shadow. Everywhere I went, Edward carried a black leather case, discreet but essential. Inside were the tools that kept me alive: epinephrine injectors, antihistamines, sterile gauze. The lifeline of a man cursed by touch. This morning, the case rested at his feet as we prepared for a high-stakes meeting. Our guests were from a competing firm in Dallas, potential partners in a project worth more than $200 million. The kind of deal that could shift the skyline itself, reshape a city block, and cement Cross Development as the dominant force in the region. The boardroom was vast, its walls floor-to-ceiling glass. Sunlight poured in, gleaming against the polished walnut table. I took my place at the head, Edward at my right, silent but vigilant. The doors opened, and our guests filed in. Leading them was a woman confident, impeccably dressed, her handshake firm as she extended her hand across the table. I hesitated, just for a breath. Her eyes held expectation. Her team was watching, my own board members were watching, and I could not refuse, so I reached forward. Skin met skin. The reaction was instant. Heat surged under my flesh like fire. Red welts bloomed across my hand, rising, burning. My throat tightened. A film of sweat broke across my brow. Not here, not now. I forced a smile, my grip steady though my body screamed. The woman withdrew, none the wiser, but Edward saw it. He always saw it. "Excuse us a moment," I said, voice even, betraying nothing. I rose, each step measured, and left the room as if I had intended it all along. Behind the closed door of my private restroom, the facade cracked, my chest heaved, air clawing at my lungs. The mirror reflected a man pale and shaking, hives spreading like wildfire across his skin. Edward was already there, swift, efficient. The cap of the injector snapped off. The sharp sting of the needle pressed against my thigh. Relief came slowly, like a tide pulling back, but the exhaustion remained. My body trembled. My pulse thundered in my ears. "You pushed it again?" Edward said quietly, his eyes steady but disapproving. "You can't keep doing this. Nate, one day it won't work. One day I don't have a choice," I snapped, though my voice cracked with strain. "This is my life." He said nothing more. He didn't need to. The silence between us was heavy with the truth. This was no life at all. When I returned to the boardroom, the world saw Nathaniel Cross again, composed, commanding, the ice king who built empires without breaking a sweat. I signed the contracts, discussed projections, nodded at figures that meant nothing compared to the fire still smoldering in my veins. But inside, a quiet despair settled deeper. Each handshake was a battle, each day a performance, and I wondered, not for the first time, if this was punishment. For what sin? I didn't know, but I felt certain it was a sentence I could never escape. The glass walls of my office glittered around me, beautiful and cold, a fortress to the world, a cage to me, and I thought, with a bitterness I could never admit aloud, maybe this is what I deserve. Maybe this is all there will ever be. Mondays were supposed to be predictable. The calendar blocked out in 15-minute increments, the contracts stacked in precise order, meetings arranged like clockwork. I thrived on control, because control was the only shield I had against the chaos of my own body. But that morning, control shattered. Edward had warned me that our usual executive secretary was out on medical leave. The agency had sent a replacement temporary. He said, "Just someone to file papers, take notes, keep the office running until the regular staff returned." I barely listened. Secretaries came and went, their names blurred together in neat signatures on HR forms. None of them mattered. Then the door opened. She stepped inside, carrying too much at once, an overstuffed binder balanced on her arm, a paper cup of coffee trembling in her hand. Her dark blonde hair was pulled into a messy knot, strands slipping free to frame a face that was both nervous and radiant. Wide hazel eyes scanned the room as if she were bracing for judgment. For a moment, I thought she had walked into the wrong office. She looked too young, too uncertain, too real for the glass fortress that was mine. I'm sorry, Mr. Cross," she stammered, her voice soft but rushed. "I was told to bring these reports up to you, and I didn't realize you'd be." She tripped. The coffee cup tipped, dark liquid splattering across the polished wood of my desk, dripping onto the pristine pages of a contract worth millions. The binder slipped, papers flying like startled birds across the carpet. Her face flushed crimson. "Oh my God, no, no, no. I'm so sorry." She dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather the pages, her hands shaking. I should have been furious. I should have barked at her for carelessness, demanded Edward escort her out. That was the man I had become: cold, precise, intolerant of mistakes. But then it happened. She reached for a page at the same time I did. Our fingers brushed. I froze. Every nerve in my body went rigid, bracing for the familiar onslaught: heat, hives, suffocation. It had happened so many times before that I could almost count down the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. No fire beneath my skin, no choking in my throat, only the warmth of her hand against mine, soft, human, startling in its gentleness. I pulled back sharply, staring as if she were some kind of miracle. She looked up, confused, still apologizing. "I'll pay for the shirt, I swear, and I'll reprint every file. Please don't fire me. I can do better. I promise." Her voice trembled, but her eyes held something earnest, something unpolished that I hadn't seen in years. I found myself speaking before I could stop the words. "It's fine. It's just coffee." Her mouth parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected mercy. "I thank you. Really. I'm Grace. Grace Holloway. I'm the new temp secretary. Though after this, I doubt I'll last very long. Grace." The name fit her in a way that unsettled me. Awkward and apologetic. Yes. But there was a kind of grace in her fumbling honesty. I stood slowly, brushing at my shirt though the stain hardly mattered. "Mr. Cross," I said automatically, though my voice sounded rough even to my own ears. She blinked. Right. Mr. Cross. Her blush deepened as she gathered the last of the papers, standing so quickly she nearly dropped them again. I'll get these recopied. Sorry again. She turned to leave, but the faint scent she left behind lingered something clean, like rain after a storm, threaded with a whisper of jasmine. When the door closed, I sat at my desk in silence, staring at the hand she had touched. No welts, no pain, only a faint tingling that felt alarmingly like hope. Edward returned moments later, his eyes flicking to the stain on my shirt. What happened? A secretary? I murmured. She spilled coffee. He frowned, and I hesitated. How could I explain the impossible? How could I tell him that, for the first time in 35 years, a woman's touch had not been a curse? Nothing, I said finally, though my heartbeat still thundered. Absolutely nothing. Edward studied me, suspicion narrowing his eyes, but he let it drop. I couldn't. Not yet. Because something had shifted, something I didn't dare believe, and yet couldn't ignore. The fortress of glass that had defined my life had cracked just slightly, just enough for a sliver of light to slip through. And that light had a name, Grace Holloway. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, a fluke, some strange, passing anomaly that would disappear as quickly as it had arrived. But it wasn't nothing. The memory of Grace's hand lingered like an echo in my skin. I couldn't stop thinking about it, the warmth, the absence of pain, the way the world hadn't collapsed around me when our fingers touched. It haunted me in meetings, followed me down the sterile hallways, intruded in the silence of my penthouse at night. I had touched a woman, and for the first time in my life, I hadn't suffered for it. That kind of miracle doesn't simply vanish. It burrows into your thoughts, takes root, and demands answers. So I found myself watching her. Grace Holloway was unlike anyone who had ever walked through the glass doors of my company. Most people came armed with ambition sharp enough to cut. They spoke in clipped voices, wore polished masks, and treated every interaction as a transaction. But Grace, she was different. Her desk was tucked in a modest corner of the executive floor, away from the gleaming conference rooms and polished brass fixtures. From my office, I had a clear view of her workspace through the glass wall. She never seemed to notice me watching. Perhaps that was part of what drew me in her complete lack of calculation. Grace was kind in ways that startled me. She remembered the names of the janitorial staff and greeted them each morning. She offered to help co-workers carry stacks of files when her own arms were already full. When the copier jammed, she muttered at it under her breath, laughing at her own clumsiness, instead of snapping in frustration the way so many others did. There was no strategy in her kindness, no agenda. It was simply who she was. I learned, quietly, that she worked nights at a diner across town, that her mother was sick cancer, someone whispered, and the hospital bills had become an anchor dragging her under. She never spoke of it directly, but I saw the way her shoulders tightened each time her phone buzzed with a message she didn't want to open. I noticed how her lunch was often nothing more than a sandwich wrapped in foil, the kind of meal someone packs quickly because it's all they can afford. Grace carried her burdens with quiet resilience, and somehow, that made her glow even brighter. I would pass her desk under the guise of checking files. Though the truth was simpler, I wanted to see her. The way she chewed her lip when she concentrated. The way her eyes lit up when she solved a problem no one else wanted to touch. Even the way she tucked stray strands of hair behind her ear. A gesture so small it shouldn't have mattered, but to me, it felt monumental. Each time, I waited for the inevitable sting of my curse, for my throat to close, for my skin to erupt. But it never came. And that terrified me almost as much as it thrilled me. Because if Grace was different, if her touch truly broke the rules of my condition, then everything I believed about my life was a lie. And lies have a way of crumbling, leaving only ruin behind. Still, I couldn't look away. She had become a puzzle I needed to solve, a mystery I couldn't ignore. But perhaps what shook me most was not what she was to me. It was what I was to her. People saw me as a title, a force, an untouchable king in a fortress of glass. Their eyes held awe or fear, but never recognition, never humanity. Grace, however, looked at me differently. When I passed her desk one afternoon, she smiled, not the polite, rehearsed smile of someone currying favor, but a simple, unguarded smile that made something deep in my chest ache. "Here's the file you asked for. Mr. Cross," she said, handing it over. Her fingers brushed mine again light, almost accidental. Still no reaction, no fire, no pain. She tilted her head slightly, studying me as if I were more than a suit and a reputation, as if she could see past the marble exterior I had spent years constructing. For one heartbeat, I wasn't the Ice King. I was just a man. It unsettled me, that gaze. It left me exposed in ways I wasn't ready to admit, but it also lit something inside me, a spark, small, dangerous, impossible to ignore. And though I told myself to focus on contracts, deadlines, and the empire I had built, I knew the truth. Grace Holloway had already begun to unravel me. I had built my life on distance, an empire of glass and steel, fortified by walls no one dared to breach. But after Grace arrived, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, searching for reasons to let someone close. At first, it was subtle, a file I asked her to bring into my office instead of leaving at the front desk. A meeting I claimed required her presence to take notes, though Edward could have handled it easily. She didn't seem to notice the pattern, or if she did, she didn't question it. She simply showed up, clutching her notebook. Her brow furrowed in concentration, as though every word mattered. The more time I spent near her, the more I began to hear pieces of her life, not because she boasted or sought sympathy, but because she spoke without artifice, the way people do when they've never learned how to hide. One afternoon, as she sorted through contracts spread across my desk, she sighed softly. "Sorry, Mr. Cross." I skipped lunch, my stomach's making all the noise in the room. I glanced up. "You should eat," I said. She gave a sheepish smile. "I will. I'll wait until I get home. I don't really like spending money downtown. Too expensive for a sandwich." Her words lingered after she left. Grace wasn't complaining. She was simply stating fact. But the idea of her going hungry while working in the center of my empire unsettled me more than I expected. A few days later, she mentioned rent. "My landlord's threatening to raise it again," she said absent-mindedly, almost to herself, while stapling reports. "I'm not sure how much longer Mom and I can afford to stay in the apartment. But it's close to the hospital, so..." She trailed off, biting her lip as if realizing she had said too much. I should have let it go. That was who I was, professional, detached, untouchable. But the words caught in my chest. Her rent, her mother, the quiet weight she carried every day without complaint. For the first time in years, I wanted to say something that mattered. Instead, I asked stiffly, "How is your mother?" Her head snapped up, surprised that I had asked. She's fighting," Grace said softly. Her hazel eyes flickered with both pride and exhaustion. "Some days are better than others. I try to help as much as I can, but it's hard." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. Hard was too small a word for the shadow I saw in her expression. Later that evening, after she'd gone home, I stood by the window of my office, staring down at the grid of lights stretching across Denver. The city looked orderly, predictable, but Grace's life wasn't orderly. It was messy, fragile, shaped by burdens I had never allowed myself to face. Something in me cracked. I began talking more when she was around, not about business, not about profits or deals, but about things I hadn't spoken aloud in years. One night, she stayed late to finish a set of notes. The office was quiet, just the hum of computers and the low whistle of wind against the glass. She rubbed her eyes, laughing softly. "Coffee number 3 today. I swear, I'm turning into my mom. She could drink a whole pot by herself." I leaned back in my chair, surprising even myself. "My mother used to bake bread," I said. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Grace looked up, startled, then smiled gently. Really? Yes, I said, my voice low. I'd come home from school, and the whole house would smell like warm bread. She died when I was 15. I haven't smelled it since. The silence after my confession felt heavy, yet not suffocating. Grace didn't rush to fill it with pity. She just nodded, her eyes soft, as though she understood the enormity of what I had just shared. For a moment, I almost forgot who I was supposed to be. Not Nathaniel Cross, the CEO, not the Ice King, just a man remembering the scent of bread and the ache of loss. The more time I spent with Grace, the more these cracks in my armor spread. She asked questions no one else dared ask. "Do you ever get tired of all this?" she once said, gesturing to the polished walls, the endless contracts. Yes, I admitted, shocking us both. And in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in decades: recognition. Not of my power, but of my humanity. I knew it was dangerous. The closer she came, the greater the risk that everything I had buried would surface. But I couldn't stop myself, because for the first time, someone wasn't speaking to Nathaniel Cross, the fortress of glass. She was speaking to Nate, the man I had almost forgotten existed. The office was never truly silent, even after the last employee left. The building seemed to breathe air vents whispering, the low hum of fluorescent lights, the occasional groan of steel settling into itself. But that night, as the city outside glittered against the glass, it felt like silence had claimed the entire floor. Only 2 desks remained lit, mine, and the one just outside my door. Grace was still there. Through the pane of glass that separated my office from the outer space, I could see her hunched over a pile of reports, her pen moving quickly, her lips pressed together in concentration. She should have gone home hours ago, yet here she was, still fighting against the tide of paper that seemed determined to drown her. I told myself it was none of my concern, but before I knew it, I was standing in the doorway. "You'll wear yourself out," I said quietly. She startled, nearly dropping her pen, then looked up with an embarrassed smile. "Sorry, I just wanted to finish these. I don't like leaving things half done." I leaned against the frame, arms folded. "You've been here since morning. Most people would have left hours ago." Grace shrugged, her eyes falling back to the papers. "I guess I'm not most people." The words hung between us, heavier than they should have been. I stepped closer, drawn in by something I couldn't name. The air between us seemed different at night, softer, less guarded, as though the darkness outside had stripped away the formality of the day. "You should still rest," I said. Her laugh was quiet, self-conscious. "If I stop working, I start thinking, and sometimes thinking is worse." I paused, caught by the honesty in her voice. "What do you think about—" She hesitated. I could see the debate flicker in her eyes, whether to tell me the truth or keep the safe distance most people preferred around me. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders dropping. "Relationships," she admitted, "or, I guess, the lack of them." I tilted my head, waiting. Grace tapped her pen against the paper, her voice low. "I've never really been in one, not a real one. I tell people I'm too busy, that work and school take up all my time. But the truth is, I'm scared." Her eyes flicked to mine, searching for judgment. "I've seen what love can do when it goes wrong. My dad left when I was 10. My mom never recovered. I watched her cry herself to sleep for years. And I thought, if that's what love is, pain, betrayal, emptiness, then maybe I don't want it. Maybe it's safer not to let anyone close." Her words pierced deeper than I expected. For a moment, I saw my own reflection in her fears: the isolation, the careful distance, the belief that love was nothing more than another word for hurt. I stepped closer, the quiet hum of the office filling the pause between us. "Grace," I said softly, "I know what it means to be afraid of closeness, to think it can only end in pain. But I need you to believe me when I tell you this. I would never hurt you. Not ever." She looked at me, eyes wide, as though she wasn't sure whether to believe the weight of my words. "You can't promise that," she whispered. "No one can." "I can," I said firmly, surprising even myself with the conviction in my tone, "because I know what it's like to live without it, to live without touch, without connection, and I would rather give you nothing than give you pain." Her lips parted slightly, trembling as though she wanted to argue but couldn't. For a long moment, we simply stood there, two people in the quiet of a glass fortress, both haunted by their pasts, both terrified of what it meant to let someone in. Then something shifted. Her eyes softened, her shoulders relaxed, and in that fragile silence, I felt a smile tug at the corners of my mouth. It startled me. I hadn't smiled, truly smiled, in years. Not the polished grin for photographers, not the polite curl of lips at banquets, but a real smile, born from something unguarded. Grace's gaze caught it, and for a second, she smiled back. The world outside fell away. No skyscrapers, no contracts, no curse. Just the quiet promise between us, hanging in the air like a fragile thread. "You should go home," I said finally, my voice gentler than it had ever been. She gathered her things slowly, almost reluctantly, as though breaking the moment would shatter something delicate. As she passed me on her way out, her hand brushed my arm. No reaction, no pain, only the faint warmth of her touch and the echo of the vow I had just made. When the door closed behind her, I stood alone in the quiet, still smiling. For the first time, I wondered if perhaps I wasn't cursed after all. Perhaps I had just been waiting for her. The night after Grace left the office, I lingered at my desk long after the city had gone quiet. Denver's skyline shimmered against the dark, each light in the towers like a heartbeat I could no longer hear. I should have gone home, but the memory of her words, her confession of fear, my vow never to hurt her, played over and over in my mind. For the first time, solitude didn't feel safe. It felt empty. My phone buzzed on the desk, not the steady rhythm of emails, not the calendar reminders I had grown used to ignoring. This was different, a message. When I unlocked the screen, the words sent a chill racing down my spine. "She's not safe with you." No name, no number I recognized, just those 6 words, as sharp as a blade pressed to my throat. I read it again, slower this time, as if a second look might change it. It didn't. The weight of the message pressed into me, heavier than any contract, any billion-dollar deal, because whoever had written it wasn't talking about business. They were talking about Grace. I rose from my chair, pacing across the wide glass floor. My reflection followed me, fractured in the windows. A man suddenly powerless. Edward was the first person I called. Within minutes, he was there, his footsteps steady, his face grim as I handed him the phone. He read the message once, twice, his jaw tightening. Anonymous, yes. Any idea who I swallowed hard? For years. I had buried the past beneath work, money, distance. But some shadows never stay buried. "There's only one person cruel enough to send this," I said finally, my voice low. "Isabella." Edward's eyes flicked up, sharp with recognition. "Monroe?" I nodded. The one who poisoned me." I finished for him. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. Isabella Monroe. Once, I had loved her, or believed I did. She had been my fiancée, the only woman I had ever trusted enough to let close. And she had nearly destroyed me. The doctors had called it a rare autoimmune reaction, but the truth was darker. Isabella had tampered with my food, my drinks, dosing me slowly over months. Not enough to kill me, but enough to make my body betray me, to make me believe I was broken. When I discovered her betrayal, she was already gone, vanished with a rival developer who had wanted nothing more than to see me fall. I thought she was out of my life for good, but the message on my phone told me otherwise. Edward set the device down carefully, his voice calm but edged with steel. "If it's her, then she knows." About Grace. His eyes met mine, unflinching. "She's not just threatening you anymore. She's threatening what you care about." I gripped the edge of my desk, the glass cool beneath my palms. The thought of Grace bright, fragile, unguarded, being pulled into Isabella's darkness, twisted something in me I couldn't control. "She can't know about Grace," I said sharply. "She can't—" Edward studied me, his expression unreadable. "You've let her too close. Nate, she sits outside your office. She's with you late at night. People notice. And if people notice, Isabella notices." The truth of it struck hard. I had spent years building walls, only to start tearing them down the moment Grace appeared. And now, the woman who had ruined me once might use her to ruin me again. Edward leaned forward, his voice quiet but heavy. "This is the danger of letting someone in. You think she heals you, but to everyone else, she's a weakness. And weaknesses, in your world, get exploited or destroyed." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't, because I knew he was right. Grace wasn't just my secretary. She wasn't just a fleeting distraction. She was the only touch that hadn't burned me, the only light that had pierced the fortress I had built, and that made her the perfect target. I sank into my chair, staring at the city below. For the first time in years, fear didn't come from my own body. It came from the thought of losing her. The message still glowed on my phone, taunting me with its simplicity. "She's not safe with you." Maybe the sender was right. Maybe my love was the very thing that would put Grace in danger. But as the night deepened, one thought crystallized with ruthless clarity. If Isabella Monroe was back, then I would do whatever it took to protect Grace Holloway, even if it meant facing the woman who had cursed me, even if it meant risking the empire I had built, even if it meant tearing down the last of my walls. I had lived half my life believing I was cursed. Doctors, therapists, specialists from Boston to Los Angeles, none of them could explain why the touch of a woman burned me. They gave it names, theories, prescriptions, but the answer was always the same. You are broken in a way no one can fix. So, when Edward reminded me of Isabella, when that anonymous message rattled the walls of my life, I did something I had sworn never to do again. I started digging. I hired a private investigator, a man whose discretion was as valuable as his skills. He'd uncovered embezzlements, exposed corporate moles, and tracked rivals who tried to play dirtier than I did. But this assignment was different. This wasn't business. This was my life. "Find everything you can about Isabella Monroe," I told him. "Where she's been, who she's spoken to, what she wants, and don't stop until you know why she's back." He nodded once, and I waited. Days passed like hours. I buried myself in contracts, but my mind was elsewhere, circling Grace, circling Isabella, circling the fear that history was repeating itself. Every time Grace smiled, every time her hand brushed mine without consequence, I felt both alive and terrified. Alive, because she proved my body wasn't doomed. Terrified, because maybe that miracle had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with the lies I had believed. The report came on a rainy Thursday. The investigator arrived at my office with a sealed envelope. His expression was grave, his eyes heavy with things he wished he didn't know. I dismissed everyone, even Edward, and tore it open with shaking hands. Inside were photographs, medical records, transcripts of emails I had never seen. Piece by piece, the puzzle of my past came together, and the picture it formed nearly brought me to my knees. It hadn't been a rare condition. It hadn't been fate. It hadn't been my body betraying me. It had been Isabella. She had poisoned me. Slow, steady doses slipped into food, into wine, into the life I shared with her. Enough to weaken me, to create symptoms that mimic disease. Enough to convince me I was defective, helpless, untouchable. And when the physical damage wasn't enough, she whispered doubts into my ear. "You look pale. You should see a doctor. Maybe you're just not meant for closeness." Gaslighting, manipulation, layer upon layer, until I stopped questioning, until I accepted that her narrative was truth. By the time she left, vanishing into the arms of a rival who wanted my empire, she had already destroyed me. Not just my health, my faith, my belief that I was capable of love. The papers in my hand trembled. Rain streaked down the glass windows behind me. blurring the Denver skyline into smudges of light. I couldn't breathe. It hadn't been a curse. It had been betrayal. And now, every memory of pain, every collapse, every night staring at the ceiling wondering why I was different, they all carried her face. Isabella Monroe, smiling sweetly as she poisoned me. I sank into my chair, the weight of it pressing me down. If my allergy was nothing more than a scar left by her cruelty, then what did that mean about Grace? Why was I able to touch her? Why did her presence feel like healing instead of harm? Was it because she was special, or because my body had simply recovered, and I had clung to her as proof of something miraculous? The thought gnawed at me. What if Grace wasn't my salvation? What if she was just the first test my body had passed after years of torment? What if I had mistaken her kindness for a cure, her touch for deliverance? When really she was only a coincidence, the idea hollowed me out. Because I didn't want Grace to be an accident. I wanted her to be the reason, the one person who could pierce through everything Isabella had taken from me. But the doubt refused to let go. I pressed my palms against my face, my breath ragged. For years I had told myself I was cursed. Now I knew I had only been deceived. And somehow, that truth was worse. Because curses can't be broken, but betrayal never stops echoing. Edward entered quietly, sensing something in my silence. His eyes flicked to the file on my desk, then back to me. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. He saw the answer in my expression. It was her. Wasn't it? He said softly. I nodded once. She made me believe I was sick. She made me believe I couldn't. My voice faltered. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. She made me believe I couldn't love. Edward's jaw tightened. She's dangerous. Nate, she always was. And now she knows you found someone else. That makes Grace the target. His warning struck true, but my mind was elsewhere, tangled in questions I couldn't silence. Was Grace my miracle, or just the cruel proof that Isabella's lies had defined half my life? And if Grace wasn't the cure, then what was she to me? The storm outside raged harder, thunder rolling across the mountains. Inside, I sat frozen, clutching the truth that had finally surfaced. I wasn't cursed, I was betrayed, and the revelation was almost too much to bear. I had never been good at confessions. Words, for me, were weapons or tools meant to close deals, silence opposition, or command respect. But with Grace, words felt different. They carried weight I couldn't control. And now, I carried the heaviest truth of all. For 3 nights after the investigator's report, I tried to bury it. I told myself it wasn't necessary, that Grace didn't need to know what Isabella had done, or what it meant about me. But every time she smiled at me, every time her fingers brushed mine without consequence, the guilt pressed harder. She deserved honesty, even if it destroyed us. I found her in the small office next to mine, late in the evening, sorting through a pile of reports. The lamp cast a warm glow over her hair, turning it almost golden, her face weary, but still carrying that quiet strength I had come to crave. "Grace," I said softly. She looked up, startled by my tone. "Nate, is something wrong?" I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. No glass walls this time, no one else to see, only her. "There's something I need to tell you." The words tasted bitter. She set her pen down slowly, watching me with cautious eyes. "Okay," she said. "I'm listening." I sat across from her, my hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. All my life, I believed I had an allergy, that I couldn't touch women without my body betraying me. Grace nodded carefully. "You told me that." "Yes," I said, but it wasn't true, or at least not the way I thought. Her brow furrowed, confusion flickering. "What do you mean?" I swallowed hard. "My ex-fiancée, Isabella. She poisoned me. Slowly. Over months. She made me believe I was broken. She whispered doubts, manipulated me, convinced me I couldn't be close to anyone. It wasn't a curse. It was her. Grace's eyes widened, the color draining from her face. She poisoned you? Yes. My voice cracked on the word. And when you came along? When I touched you and felt nothing? No pain, no reaction. I thought you were the miracle. I thought you healed me. Her lips parted, but no words came. I pressed on, desperate for her to understand. But now I know the truth. You didn't heal me, Grace. The poison finally left my body. My reaction was never fate. It was just betrayal. Silence fell between us, sharp and suffocating. Her chair scraped softly against the floor as she leaned back, her eyes wide with something I hadn't seen in her before. Fear? So, what are you saying? She whispered. That I was just, what, a test proof that you weren't sick anymore? No. The word came out too quickly, too desperate. That's not what I meant. But it's what you said, she shot back, her voice trembling now. You thought I was some kind of miracle cure, and when you found out the truth, suddenly I'm not special. Suddenly I'm just... She broke off, shaking her head. I reached across the table, but she pulled back. Grace, listen to me. You are special. You mean more to me than anyone ever has. I love don't... Her voice was sharp, cutting through mine. Don't say that right now, because I don't know if it's real, or if it's just you clinging to me because I wasn't poison. Her words pierced deeper than any wound Isabella had left behind. I felt the ground slipping beneath me, the walls of glass around my world cracking again, but this time, not in a way that brought light. This time, they shattered into darkness. Grace, please, I said, my voice breaking. I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted you to feel used. She stood abruptly, gathering her things with shaking hands. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, her face pale with betrayal. You should have told me sooner, she said. You should have trusted me enough to share the truth. Instead, you let me believe I was something I'm not. You let me believe I mattered in a way I never did. I stood too, my chest tight, panic clawing at me. You do matter, I said fiercely. You're everything to me. But she was already moving toward the door. I reached for her arm, then stopped, terrified that my touch, once a miracle, would now feel like chains. So I let my hand fall. Grace. My voice cracked. She paused at the doorway, her back to me, for a heartbeat. I thought she might turn, might give me a chance to repair what had broken. Instead, her voice came soft, trembling. I need to think. I can't do this right now. The door clicked shut behind her, and just like that, the office was silent again. But it wasn't the silence of solitude I had always known. This silence was different. It was hollow. It was the sound of losing the one thing I had never believed I could have: love. I sank back into the chair she had just vacated, staring at the empty space where she had been. The reports, the pens, the lamp, they were all still there. But Grace was gone, and with her, the fragile hope I had dared to hold on to. For the first time in years, I didn't feel cursed by Isabella's poison. I felt cursed by myself, by the truth I had buried too long, and by the trust I had shattered in the only person who ever saw me as more than a king of glass. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped into silence. My penthouse was a monument to success: glass walls, polished stone floors, furniture imported from Milan. Every detail screamed of power, precision, control, and yet, as the doors closed behind me, all I felt was emptiness. The city sprawled below, lights flickering like constellations scattered across the plains. From this height, Denver looked small, manageable, almost fragile. A man could stand here and believe he ruled it all. But power meant nothing when your heart was fractured. Contracts couldn't mend trust. Money couldn't buy back the look in Grace's eyes as she walked away. I poured a glass of bourbon, letting the ice clink against crystal. The burn of it in my throat was sharp, but it didn't dull the ache inside. Nothing could. Her words echoed in the quiet. You let me believe I was something I'm not. I had sworn never to be my father, cold, distant, incapable of tenderness. Yet here I was, driving away the only person who had seen me as more than a title. I sank into the leather armchair by the window, staring at the city that had given me everything and taken everything in return. For a long time, I let the memories come. I saw my mother's hands, dusted with flour, kneading bread in the kitchen of our small Colorado home. The smell of it filled every corner, warm and safe, a promise of love I hadn't known how to name as a child. She used to hum while she worked, a soft tune that lingered in the air long after she was gone. Gone too soon. Cancer had taken her when I was 15. The house fell silent then, and the silence never left me. My father filled it with rules, not love. He was a man of discipline, sharp words and sharper looks. Grief turned him into stone, and in his eyes, vulnerability was weakness. So I learned quickly: do not cry, do not hope, do not need. I built walls long before I built towers. Walls to protect myself from the hollowness of a house where laughter had died. Walls to survive in a world where closeness was a liability. But those walls came at a cost. I knew how to conquer, how to control, how to command. But I never learned how to love. That thought gnawed at me now, sitting in my fortress of glass and steel. Could I ever truly love Grace, or was I simply clinging to her because she was the first who slipped past my defenses? Was it love, or was it possession? The desperate grasp of a man terrified of being alone. The questions circled me like vultures. I thought of the way she had smiled, not at the CEO, not at the Ice King, but at the man beneath. I thought of how easily I had shattered that trust by hiding the truth, by letting her believe she was my salvation instead of simply my heart's desire. And beneath it all, I thought of Isabella, the lies she had fed me, the way she had weaponized closeness, turned intimacy into a prison. Even now, years later, I wondered if some part of me was still trapped in her cage, still measuring every relationship against her betrayal. I pressed a hand to my chest, as though I could hold together the pieces splintering inside. The bourbon glass sat untouched on the table. What I wanted wasn't at the bottom of a bottle. It was in the small office down the hall, in the hands of a woman who had walked away because I couldn't give her what she deserved: honesty, openness, love without conditions. I rose and paced the room, restless. The penthouse felt like a museum, each object curated, perfect, lifeless, no warmth, no laughter, no bread baking in the oven, no music humming in the background, just silence, stretching endlessly. I had built an empire to protect myself from this silence. Yet here it was again, swallowing me whole. I stood before the window, staring out at the city, my reflection faint in the glass. A man in a tailored suit, a man with power, with wealth, with everything the world told him he should want. But the reflection didn't show the truth. The truth was a boy who had lost his mother too soon. A boy who had learned from his father that love was dangerous and need was shameful. A boy who had grown into a man terrified of being seen. Grace had seen me. And now she was gone. The weight of it pressed into me, heavier than any skyscraper I had built. I could rebuild towers. I could recover from financial losses, from betrayals, from enemies circling my empire. But I didn't know how to rebuild trust. Not with Grace, not with myself. The city lights blurred through the glass as my vision stung. For years I had told myself I was incapable of tears. But tonight, alone in the fortress I had mistaken for home, I felt the sting of them anyway. Was I capable of love, or only of control, of ownership, of holding so tightly that everything I touched eventually slipped away? I didn't have the answer. All I had was the echo of Grace's footsteps as she left, and the silence that followed. And in that silence, I realized the cruelest truth of all: I had spent my whole life running from loneliness. But in the end, loneliness was all I had left. I had convinced myself that Isabella's message was only a shadow, an echo of the past trying to haunt me. but shadows grow darker when you ignore them. And Isabella Monroe was not the kind of ghost that faded quietly. She wanted me to know she was back, and she wanted me to suffer. The first sign came when Grace didn't show up to work on time. Grace, who always arrived early with a cup of cheap coffee in hand, apologizing if she was even 5 minutes late. The clock ticked past 9, then 10. I told myself she was sick, that she had overslept, but something in my chest twisted, sharp and relentless. By 11, my phone rang. Edward's voice was tight. "There's been an accident." The world tilted. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Where she's alive," he said quickly, knowing what mattered most. "She's at St. Luke's. You should come." I was already moving, grabbing my coat, ignoring the startled looks of my staff as I stormed through the office. When I arrived at the hospital, Grace was sitting on a gurney in the ER, pale but conscious. Her hands trembled as she clutched a paper cup of water, her knuckles white. When she saw me, her lips parted, as though she wanted to speak but couldn't. I crossed the room in seconds, my heart pounding harder than it ever had in any boardroom battle. "What happened?" The nurse spoke before Grace could. "Brake failure?" She swerved off Spear Boulevard, nearly hit the guardrail. "She's lucky to be alive?" Brake failure, 2 words that set fire to my blood. Grace shook her head quickly. "It was just the car. Old and beat up. I should have had it checked." "No." My voice was sharper than I intended, drawing stares. I lowered it, stepping closer. "This wasn't an accident." She blinked, confusion clouding her hazel eyes. "What are you talking about?" I turned to Edward, who had followed me in. "Check the car, now." He nodded once, already pulling out his phone. Grace looked between us, her voice rising. "Nate, you're scaring me. What do you mean it wasn't an accident?" I hesitated. For weeks, I had shielded her from the truth, telling myself it was to protect her. But standing there, seeing her shaken, seeing how close I had come to losing her, I couldn't hide it anymore. "There's someone who doesn't want us together," I said slowly. "Someone from my past. Her name is Isabella Monroe." Grace's eyes widened, recognition dawning. "The ex, the one who—" "Yes," I cut in, "the one who poisoned me. She's back, and she's dangerous." The color drained from Grace's face. She set the cup down, her hands trembling harder now. You think she did this?" "I know she did." The words left no room for doubt, though inside me, doubt clawed at every edge. Edward returned not long after, his face grim. It wasn't age or rust. The brake lines were cut, clean, precise. This wasn't chance. It was sabotage. Grace's breath hitched, her hand flying to her mouth. I reached for her instinctively, then hesitated, afraid she would pull away as she had before. But she didn't. Her hand slipped into mine, small and shaking, and for once I felt only warmth, not rejection, not fear. "Nate," she whispered. Her voice broke on my name. I could have died. The truth of it hit harder than any blow. The thought of her gone, her laughter silenced, her eyes closed forever, was unbearable. I tightened my grip, holding on as though I could anchor her to life itself. "You won't," I said fiercely. "I won't let that happen. Not to you." But inside, I knew the truth. I couldn't control everything. I couldn't control Isabella, and I couldn't control the fact that loving Grace had put her in mortal danger. Later that night, after she had been discharged with only a few bruises and a prescription for rest, I stood alone in the hospital parking lot. Rain slicked the pavement, neon lights shimmering in the puddles. Edward waited by the car, silent, giving me space. I tilted my head back, staring at the sky. Cold drops hit my face, running down my skin like tears I refused to shed. Isabella had drawn the line. This wasn't a game, not a message. This was war, and Grace was at the center of it. For the first time, I realized just how fragile my world was. The empire I had built could withstand market crashes, lawsuits, even betrayal. But It couldn't withstand the loss of Grace Holloway. If Isabella wanted to destroy me, she had found the perfect weapon. And if I wasn't careful, she would succeed, because I wasn't afraid of dying. But I was terrified of living in a world without Grace. The night of the accident left me hollow. Even after Grace was safely home, the image of her pale face in the hospital haunted me. The sound of her whisper "I could have died" echoed in my chest, louder than any storm. I had lived my whole life in silence, building walls, hiding behind power, but silence hadn't saved me. It hadn't saved my mother, or my childhood, or the fragile love I once gave to Isabella. And now, silence was threatening to steal Grace from me. I couldn't let it. So, for the first time in years, I didn't care about appearances. I didn't care about control. I cared only about one thing: her. It was nearly midnight when I arrived at the small apartment she shared with her mother. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with modest brick buildings and flickering street lamps. A world away from my penthouse of glass and steel. I stood outside her door for a long moment, the cool night air burning in my lungs. Then I knocked. The door opened slowly. Grace stood there in a worn sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes tired. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't quite believe I was real. "Nate," she whispered. "What are you doing here?" I swallowed, my throat dry. I couldn't stay away. She glanced over her shoulder, worried. "My mom's asleep. Keep your voice down." I nodded, stepping inside when she moved aside. The apartment was small, lived in, filled with details money could never buy: crocheted blankets on the couch, photographs on the wall, the faint smell of lavender, and something warm lingering from dinner. It wasn't polished, but it was home. I turned to her, my chest aching with words I could no longer hold back. "Grace, I've spent my whole life hiding, from people, from pain, from love, but I can't hide anymore. Not from you." She shook her head, her arms crossing as if to hold herself together. "Nate, you lied to me. You let me think I was healing you, when the truth was something else entirely. How am I supposed to trust you after that?" Her words cut deep, but I didn't flinch. I deserved her anger. I deserved her doubt. Still, I stepped closer, my voice raw. "Because I'm not asking you to trust the man I was. I'm asking you to trust the man standing here now, the man who has seen what life without you looks like, and knows he can't survive it." Her eyes glistened, but she turned away, pacing to the window. "You don't get it. Being with you isn't just about us anymore. Someone tried to kill me today. I don't even know why, except because I'm with you." I closed the distance, my hands trembling as I reached for hers. This time, she didn't pull away. I held her tightly, my voice breaking. "I choose you, Grace, every day, no matter the cost. If it means losing my company, my reputation, everything I've built, I'll pay it. If it means facing Isabella again, I'll face her. If it means dying, I'll die, but I will not lose you." Tears slipped down her cheeks, her lips trembling. "Nate, I know I don't deserve forgiveness." I continued, my voice fierce. "I know I made mistakes, but what I feel for you, it isn't survival. It isn't coincidence. It's love, and I won't let fear take it from me." For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant city noise through the thin glass of the window. Grace's breath shook as she looked at me, her eyes wide with both fear and longing. "Finally," she whispered, "you don't make promises lightly, do you?" "No," I said, "not to anyone, and never to you." Her shoulders sagged, the fight in her softening, and in that moment, she let me pull her into my arms. Her head rested against my chest, her tears dampening my shirt. I held her as though the world outside had ceased to exist, as though Isabella's shadow could never reach us here. And for the first time since my mother died, I felt what home truly was. Not the penthouse, not the skyline, not the empire. Home was this Grace's warmth against me, her heartbeat steady beneath my hand, the quiet promise of something stronger than fear. I don't know if I can do this, she murmured, her voice muffled against me. But I love you, Nate, and I don't want to lose you either. I closed my eyes, pressing my lips to her hair. You won't. Not while I'm breathing. Outside, the city carried on. But in that small apartment, in the fragile space between grief and hope, I chose love. And this time, I chose it without fear. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of silence that clung to every corner, weighted with things unsaid. Grace sat across from me on the couch, her hands twisting the hem of her sweater. Her eyes, those hazel eyes that had undone me from the start, flickered with a storm I couldn't calm. She loved me. I had heard it in her trembling voice. And yet, fear lingered, sharp as glass between us. Finally, she broke the silence. Nate, I want to believe you. I do. But everything about this about us, it feels like it's built on secrets. And secrets destroy people. I can't go through what my mom did. I can't give my heart to someone who's only going to break it. Her words cut deeper than any blade. But I knew she was right. I had been holding back pieces of myself, afraid that the whole truth would be too much for her to carry. Not anymore. You deserve the truth, I said quietly. All of it. Even the parts I've tried to bury. Her gaze lifted, wary, but steady. I'm listening. So, I told her. I told her about Isabella Monroe, how she had walked into my life when I was younger, how I had believed her love was salvation, how her smile had hidden poison, slipped into my meals, into my glass of wine, into my very bloodstream until my body became a prison I couldn't escape. How she had whispered doubts, twisting my mind until I believed I was cursed, until I believed no woman's touch could ever be safe. Grace's hand rose to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She did that to you? The woman you were going to marry? Yes, I said, my voice breaking. And I let it define me. I let it turn me into someone I wasn't meant to be. I shut the world out. Grace. I built walls so high no one could climb them. Until you. Her eyes glistened. But you never told me. You let me think I was fixing you. That I was some kind of miracle. I was afraid, I admitted. Afraid you'd see me as weak. Afraid you'd run if you knew how broken I was. But Grace, it was never about you healing me. It was about you seeing me. For the first time in my life. I wasn't the Ice King. I wasn't the CEO. I wasn't a man cursed. I was just Nate. And you didn't run. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and I ached to wipe them away. But I forced myself to wait for her permission, for her choice. She drew a shaky breath. I don't know if I can handle being pulled into your past. Isabella. She sounds dangerous, and if she's willing to hurt me just to get to you... Her voice cracked, and fear flared in her eyes. That fear nearly broke me. I leaned forward, my voice firm. She won't touch you, not while I'm alive. I swear to you. Grace, I will protect you from her, from anyone, whatever it takes. Her lips trembled, torn between trust and doubt. For a moment, the weight of her silence pressed down on me. Then she whispered, "Why me, Nate? Why risk everything for me?" I didn't hesitate, because you are the only real thing in my life. You're not money. You're not power. You're not a deal I can negotiate or a tower I can build. You are the only thing that makes me want to be more than I've been. You make me want to be worthy. The words hung in the air, raw and unpolished, but true. And slowly, as if deciding to let go of the rope she had been clinging to, Grace leaned into me. Her arms slipped around my shoulders, tentative at first, then tighter. Her forehead pressed against my chest, and I wrapped her in my arms as though shielding her from the world itself. For the first time in weeks, my body didn't tremble with fear or doubt. It trembled with relief. We stayed like that for a long time, saying nothing, just holding on. Her tears dampened my shirt, my heart beat steady beneath her ear, and in that fragile embrace, I felt something shift. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't safety, not with Isabella still circling like a predator. But it was hope. When Grace finally pulled back, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. I don't know what tomorrow looks like. I don't know if I can ever forget what you kept from me. But I believe you. And I don't want to give up on us. Not yet. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. Her willingness to stay even in the shadow of danger was more grace than I deserved. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, my hand lingering against her cheek. Her skin was warm, real, grounding, and for the first time, I didn't feel cursed at all. But as I held her, I knew the truth lingered like a storm on the horizon. Isabella was still out there. Her threat hadn't faded, and though Grace and I had found each other again in that fragile embrace, the danger was only beginning. The world outside might have still been spinning with threats and shadows, but inside that little apartment, time seemed to pause. The lamp in the corner cast a warm glow, softening the worn walls and making the space feel like a sanctuary. Grace sat beside me on the couch, her eyes still damp from tears, her body trembling as though she carried every burden at once. But when her hand found mine, the tremble eased, not gone, but gentled like a storm moving out to sea. We didn't speak at first. We didn't need to. The silence between us no longer felt heavy with secrets. It felt tender. I brushed my thumb across her knuckles, marveling at the simplicity of touch. For so long, touch had meant pain, collapse, humiliation. Now, it meant connection. It meant life. Grace looked at me, her hazel eyes searching, vulnerable. Are you sure? Nate. After everything, I nodded slowly. I've never been more sure of anything. But only if you want this too. Only if you're ready. Her lips trembled into a soft smile. I don't know if I'll ever be fully ready. But I don't want to be afraid anymore. Not with you. Something inside me broke open at her words, not the breaking of glass, but the breaking of chains. I leaned in, and for the first time, our kiss wasn't tentative, wasn't hesitant. It was full and deep, carrying everything we had, both held back longing, fear, hope, love. Her hand slid to my shoulders, anchoring herself, while mine cupped her face as though she were the most fragile treasure in the world. And maybe she was. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless. But it wasn't the suffocating breathlessness I had always feared. It was joy. The night unfolded slowly, delicately. We moved as though learning each other's language for the first time, every glance, every touch, every whisper a new word. I traced the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw, memorizing her not as a miracle, but as Grace, the woman who had chosen to stay, even when fear begged her to run. She touched me too, not with caution, but with care. Her fingers lingered at my collar, my chest, exploring not the man of power or wealth, but the man beneath the man who had been starving for this closeness without ever admitting it. Each touch was a revelation. Not once did pain strike. Not once did fear claw at me. Only warmth. Only the realization that love, true love, didn't burn it, healed. At some point, we left the couch behind. Her small bedroom smelled faintly of lavender and detergent, the quilt worn but clean. It was nothing like the luxury of my penthouse, but it was more beautiful than any place I had ever been, because it was hers, and now it was ours. We lay together beneath the quilt, whispering into the quiet. She told me about the books she used to read as a girl, the stories that made her believe in worlds bigger than her own. I told her about the drawings I used to make as a boy, sketching towers and cities on the backs of notebooks when I couldn't sleep. We weren't just sharing a night. We were sharing the pieces of ourselves no one else had ever seen. When exhaustion finally pulled her into sleep, she curled against me, her breath warm against my chest. I stayed awake longer, watching the rise and fall of her shoulders, the way her hair fanned across the pillow. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for pain. I wasn't bracing for collapse. I was simply happy. The word felt foreign in my mind. Happiness had always been tied to victory, to achievement, to conquest. But lying there with Grace, I realized I had been wrong. Happiness was this: a quiet room, a woman's heartbeat steady against mine, the certainty that even in a world filled with betrayal and danger, there was one place where I was safe. I pressed a kiss to her forehead, whispering into the darkness, though she couldn't hear me, "You're my heaven, Grace, my beginning and my end." Sleep came for me too eventually, but not the restless sleep of a man haunted. This was different. This was peace. The storm outside hadn't passed. Isabella was still out there, circling like a vulture. But for one night, for this night, I allowed myself to believe that love was stronger than fear. And in Grace's arms, I finally understood what it meant to be whole. The storm broke not with thunder, but with headlines. By dawn, every financial network, every business magazine, every gossip column had the same story splashed across its front page: the Poison King of Denver, Nathaniel Cross's secret past. The articles were full of lies, twisted half-truths dressed up as fact. They painted me as a fraud, a man who built his empire through manipulation and cruelty. And worst of all, they named Grace, the secretary turned lover, the girl he used as a cure. It was Isabella's work, her venom, sharpened into words. And this time, she wasn't hiding in the shadows. She wanted the world to watch me bleed. The board demanded an emergency meeting. Reporters swarmed the plaza outside my tower, their cameras flashing like gunfire. Employees whispered in hallways, eyes darting toward me as though they suddenly saw the ghost of a scandal clinging to my suit. For the first time in years, the fortress of glass I had built felt fragile. But I wasn't the same man I had been. I wasn't the boy crushed beneath betrayal. I wasn't the Ice King terrified of touch. And I wasn't alone. Grace stood beside me in the private elevator, her hand in mine. She was pale, shaken by the sudden glare of the public eye, but her grip was steady. "I'm with you," she whispered, "no matter what they say." Her words steadied me more than any speech could. If Isabella wanted a war, she would get one, but this time, I had something worth fighting for. When the doors opened, Isabella Monroe was already waiting in the boardroom. She was as striking as ever, dark hair swept back. Crimson lips curved into a smile that was all venom. She looked at me as though nothing had changed, as though years hadn't passed since she had poisoned me and walked away. "Nate," she purred, or should I say, the poisoned king. Quite the story, isn't it? The mighty Nathaniel Cross brought down not by rivals, but by his own body. I didn't sit. I didn't flinch. I met her gaze, my voice steady. "Your lies won't work this time. Isabella," her smile sharpened. "Lies, I simply gave the world the truth. That you're weak, that you're desperate, that you clung to a naive little secretary because she made you feel whole again." Her eyes flicked to Grace, dripping with malice. "She's not love, Nate. She's a crutch. And when she breaks, so will you." Grace stiffened beside me, but I squeezed her hand. I wouldn't let Isabella's poison reach her. "The truth," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the room, "is that you poisoned me. You made me believe I was cursed. You tried to break me, and for years, you almost succeeded, but you failed." Isabella's smile faltered. The board members shifted uncomfortably, murmurs rippling through the room. I stepped forward, no longer the man who hid behind silence. "You see, Isabella, you don't get to define me anymore. Not with poison, not with lies, not with headlines. Because I know who I am, and I know who I love." I turned slightly, my eyes on Grace. She met my gaze, tears glistening, but proud. "I choose her." I continued, my voice breaking but strong. "Every day, every moment, she is not my cure. She is my heart, and no amount of poison can take that away." The room was silent. Even Isabella's mask cracked, a flicker of rage slipping through her composure. "You think love will protect you," she hissed. "Love makes you weak." It always has. No, I said, my voice firm. Love makes me stronger than you will ever understand. For the first time, I saw it fear in her eyes, because she realized her power was gone, her poison, her lies, her games they could no longer control me. Edward stepped forward then, placing a file on the table. Evidence, he said coolly. Bank records, medical reports, proof of Isabella Monroe's actions, past and present, enough to end this little charade. The board members leaned in, eyes widening as they skimmed the documents. Isabella's face went pale. Her empire of deception was crumbling, stone by stone. I took a final step closer, my voice low but deadly calm. You don't get to haunt me anymore. You don't get to touch her life. If you come near Grace again, if you breathe another lie into the world, I will make sure you never get the chance to hurt anyone else. For a heartbeat. The room was still. Then Isabella laughed, brittle and hollow. Perhaps you've changed after all. But remember, Nate, love is fragile, and fragility always breaks. She swept from the room, her heels clicking like gunshots against the marble floor. I stood tall, but inside, I felt the tremor of the battle not yet over. She was wounded, cornered, but not gone. Isabella Monroe didn't vanish so easily. Grace slipped her hand back into mine, grounding me. Her voice was soft, but fierce. She can't touch what we have. Nate, not unless we let her. I looked at her, at the strength in her small frame, the fire in her eyes. And for the first time, I believed it. The past had tried to break me. The lies had tried to silence me. But with Grace beside me, I was no longer the man who hid in shadows. I was ready to face whatever came next. The city felt different after the storm. It wasn't that the skyline had changed, or that the streets looked any less crowded, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking alone. It was early morning when Grace and I left the apartment. The sun had just risen, painting the horizon with soft gold and pink. The air carried the crisp scent of spring, mixed with the faint sweetness of blossoms drifting from the park nearby. We walked in silence at first, our steps steady, side by side. Her hand slipped into mine, and I didn't flinch. No fear, no fire under my skin, only warmth. I tightened my fingers around hers, marveling at how simple it was, how natural. Something that once felt impossible now felt inevitable. Grace glanced up at me, her hazel eyes soft but thoughtful. You're quiet, she said gently. I smiled faintly. Quiet feels different now. Not heavy, not empty, just peaceful. She nodded, her lips curving into a small smile. I like this version of you. We found a bench near the edge of the park, overlooking a pond where ducks glided across the water. Children laughed in the distance, their voices carrying on the breeze. It was ordinary, simple, and that's what made it extraordinary. I turned to her, my voice low. Grace, I need to say this. Not for you, because I think you already know, but for me. She tilted her head, waiting. All my life, I thought I was cursed. I thought I was unworthy of closeness, of love. And when you came into my life, I clung to you like a drowning man grabbing at a lifeline. But I see now you're not my cure. You're not my salvation. You're simply you, and that's enough. That's more than enough. Her eyes shimmered, tears gathering but not falling. She reached up, brushing her fingers against my cheek. And you're not the Ice King anymore. You're just Nate, the man I love, the man I believe in. I covered her hand with mine, pressing it against my face. No shaking, no hesitation, only gratitude. I used to think power was everything. I admitted money, control, building something untouchable so no one could ever hurt me again. But none of it mattered, not compared to this, not compared to us. Grace leaned closer, her forehead resting against mine. We'll still face hard days, she whispered. Your past doesn't just disappear, and I'm not perfect, Nate. I'll get scared, I'll doubt, but I don't want to run anymore. I want to stay. I want to fight for this with you. Something in me eased at her words, like a knot finally untangling. For so long, I had carried the weight of proving myself, of controlling every outcome. But love wasn't about control. It was about choosing every day, every moment even when fear whispered otherwise. We sat like that for a while, just breathing, just being. The world moved on around us, but for once, I didn't feel the need to chase it. When we finally rose to leave, I laced my fingers through hers again. Our steps were in rhythm, our hands joined, our shadows long on the pavement as the sun climbed higher. I realized then that healing wasn't a destination. It wasn't something Grace could give me or something I could buy with wealth. It was a journey one we were taking together, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of where it might lead. As we walked out of the park, I glanced at her, memorizing the curve of her smile, the way the light touched her hair. Grace. Yes. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this whatever comes. I won't face it in silence anymore. I'll face it with you. Her smile deepened, her hand squeezing mine. That's all I need to hear. And in that moment, with her hand in mine and the sun breaking through the last of the morning haze, I understood the truth I had been running from my entire life. Love doesn't erase the darkness, but it gives you the courage to walk through it. Together. Ease of the heart. Nathaniel Cross's journey reminds us that true strength lies not in isolation, but in the courage to open ourselves to love, even after betrayal and pain. Grace Holloway's unwavering honesty and compassion show that trust and authenticity are the foundation of meaningful connections. Together, they demonstrate that love is not a cure, but a partnership one that requires patience, vulnerability, and courage to face both past shadows and present fears. For those of us who have lived long enough to carry scars, emotional or physical, the story is a powerful reminder that healing begins when we allow ourselves to be seen, and when we choose to trust again, even if the risk of hurt exists. Life is full of uncertainties, and the past may linger, but embracing love with honesty and bravery can transform isolation into connection, fear into hope. No matter our age, it is never too late to open our hearts, to cherish someone fully, and to recognize that true fulfillment comes from shared courage, mutual respect, and the willingness to walk together through life's challenges. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this heartfelt story of love, courage, and healing. If it touched your heart, please like, share with someone special, and subscribe to Shining Stories for more inspiring tales. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share the next journey with you.